village or town. And with this in mind, I would like to now pass the floor to Professor Alexander Schieffer, and would like to ask him to share with us how your work with the Transformational Center for Integral Development attempts to restore and restory culture in countries which are affected by conflict or crisis.
Thank you very much. Does it go without microphone as well? Well, I first want to say I'm inspired first by the student presentation and the way actually how they, in their own authentic voices, in a kind of academic environment, shared not only their being, their passion for peace, and articulated it most beautifully, I guess also inspired by the theater of transformation process of Dr. Ramamani. And I was inspired, I must say, Elena, also by the level of authenticity that came through these images, which, and you called your documentary Somos, we are. So you go into the being of the people, and that is for me really the starting point of transformation. And to be authentic to this kind of opening words, I want to begin with my own being and share, because today one of the emphases is arts and culture, share a poem of mine with you, which asks the question, why? The willingness to fight another for his God, her face, their race for land, oil, diamonds, minerals, revenge, you name it. Why? Sheer ignorance is at its core the lack to see oneself as source, abundant, full of endless treasures, of all required to give birth to brighter heavens on this darkened earth, to father, mother, a new human face of ever giving, ever living, inner, outer space of ever glowing, ever flowing, traceless love and grace. Well, this is about touching the being of a person, but also for me touching the being of a culture, because my own story and my own process towards working on transformation is connected to who I am as a person and who I am also as a German. I grew up in Germany in the 60s and 70s, and while the war was long over, I could feel the reverberations of the Second World War and the horrors that took place in this country. And I was deeply concerned, and that was the starting point of my own process of being passionate about how do we work in conflict, in peace, in war-torn country, and often, as we know, it takes generations and generations until a conflict and healing has taken place. So that is me. And so I began this journey, and I began some 15 years ago to start an organization called Transform. And I started it with a gentleman called Ronnie Lessem. And Ronnie Lessem is the son of Jewish immigrants who ended up to be born in what was then Rhodesia, today Zimbabwe, where they fled Nazi Europe. And Ronnie actually, while he escaped the war in Europe, was exposed to the colonial oppression in the new home in which he lived, then Rhodesia, and he became passionate in his life about how do we free not only Africa, but also how do we bring the fullness of each of the African and global cultures into life. And that brought us together to start Transform and to develop a process that we call integral development, a process towards what we call transformative peace, which connects personal transformation, community transformation, and societal transformation. We call it often a process for holistic development, and this is also a pointer, if you take the abbreviation, PhD, of what we are offering as one of our offerings. We also offer a PhD program which is leading to make transformative impacts and is always starting with the very being of the people who are joining and the very being of the cultures these people are representing. And I decided today not to bring anything that I can put on screen, but I brought a couple of symbols to take you on a little journey through some of the countries in which we work, and I had to make a selection of some of the projects to give you an illustration of what we mean by holistic development, addressing countries in post-conflict, in conflict, and in war or post-war. I begin in the Middle East, to which this first table is dedicated. And I'm telling you the story of an organization called MedLabs is short for Medical Laboratory, sitting in Jordan, founded by Palestinians passionate about bringing peace into the Middle East through enterprise work. And we began to work with them, and they evolved their organization from a healthcare provider into one that is caring for healthy societies. And the symbol, one of the symbols, cultural symbol of their work is care. The entire organization works with care circles in which they address the burning issues in their own organization and in the communities that surround the organization. And care is also an abbreviation of the holistic process that we are offering, because care stands for community activation, which you powerfully showed, Elena. You activate the community. A is for awakening cultural, holistic consciousness. R is research to innovation. Yes, we need academics, but we need it embedded in transformative processes. And finally, the E is for embodiment. What you develop, your innovations, you have to embody to become an authentic organization. This is the first PhD that came out of this work, a PhD that led to the transformation of this enterprise to become a force for healing in their society. The symbol of this enterprise is an olive tree. For those of you who know the Middle East, this is one of the most dear cultural symbols of this region. It has 4 branches. 4 is also the number of care and the integral approach that we are using. And it's deeply rooted, as you can see, on a Palestinian rock. It's an enterprise that sees itself as a tree of life embedded in society and that is restoring life in the region. And then they're moving from there to Africa, and I want to tell you the story of an ex-brigadier, a general who joined our program in Zimbabwe. And he was a freedom fighter against the colonial forces to free what was then Rhodesia into Zimbabwe. And Brigadier Abel then started after that an enterprise on peace and security, seeing enterprise and economics as a force to restore society. In our work with him, we helped him to evolve this enterprise not into a colonial copy of Western enterprise models, but to develop an enterprise which is based on African culture. And he chose a baobab because he said, my enterprise, and I can share much more through his PhD that he wrote, is one that is offering shelter, that is giving food, that is giving water, that is deeply rooted in society, and that, if needed, can also heat an entire family or a community. So this is the baobab enterprise. And together with about 20 PhDs in Zimbabwe in a program that we run there, they connected their individual stories to restore their societies and wrote a book on integral green Zimbabwe, an African phoenix rising, published some 3-4 years ago, well in the time of Mugabe, to show how even in conflict-ridden countries we can develop together a new story. And academia can play a role, a transformed academia as I see it. I want to take you to Nigeria, and we have a Nigerian lady here, or we had her here earlier playing, and I want to introduce a gentleman who joined our program some 5 years ago, Anselm Adodo. Anselm is a Benedictine monk. He joined our program. He is a peace builder. He is the founder of an organization called Paix. Pax is a Latin term for peace, as we all know, and Pax is by now Nigeria's largest producer of African traditional medicine products. This is their first product. It's a cough syrup. But much more important than the syrup is that Anselm saw and sees his enterprise as one that restores peace in community. He brings Christians and Muslims together and uses the enterprise platform to restore ethnic or religious conflicts. Beyond that, that is his work on communitalism. He bridges also the conflictual divide between capitalism and communism and says Africa, in its true to its own cultural roots, has a different economic model to offer, one that is less violent than the existing capitalist one. He calls it communitalism, and he plays it out in his own region. That is a case to visit. All of these cases have a reality to them that you can see on paper, but also in practice. From Nigeria, I want to go very briefly to Sri Lanka. Some of you may know Savodaya. I don't know, could I have a hand sign? Is anyone familiar with Savodaya in Sri Lanka? Perhaps one of the world's largest development initiatives started in post-colonial Sri Lanka exactly 60 years ago. Their birthday is this December. It was started by our friends Dr. Aryaratne, often dubbed the Gandhi of Sri Lanka, who saw this development initiative, which he called Savodaya, it's a Gandhian term, called awakening of all, as a force to awaken individuals, communities, and the entire nation, ultimately the world, into a process of holistic development and of restoring peace and reconciliation in post-conflict and post-civil war Sri Lanka. With the Aryaratnes, we work now for about 10 years, and we developed a holistic development model which is framed as a lotus. The lotus as a symbol, cultural symbol for awakening, a symbol also for the Buddha, and Sri Lanka, as you know, is one of the oldest Buddhist nations of the world, so they tap deeply into their own cultural space. And they developed this lotus integral model which brings together cultural peace and cultural spiritual peace, economic peace, political peace, and ecological peace. All of these dimensions connected into what we call integral development. And I must say, being here on in the Peace Week event, initially, yes, I started out with a deep vision for peace, but my initial ambition was to transform academia into one that can address the most burning issues in our societies, beginning with economics. The work developed based on the passions of the people that we met in post-conflict countries, more and more into a model that I would call transformative peace in a holistic way, and that is at the very heart of the organization I do. And this is also at the heart of the project. Some of the projects I do together with Dr. Ramamani, and I evoke her spirit because she cannot be here with us, because her own process of theater of transformation follows 4 steps, which are, back to my beginnings today, beautifully aligned with the care model, where community activation in her case is about witness reality. That is what I saw in Elena's work a lot. Where awakening of cultural and integral consciousness is aligned with awakened possibilities, and you could see it in our 4 actors today. Where research to innovation is aligned with envision innovation, and embodiment is where you ultimately enact transformation. And I want to end with introducing Ek Yu, who are here with us. He is on our PhD program, and his induction was 4 weeks ago. And he shared at the very end of the induction week to the PhD, each of them played out, enacted their envisioned contribution to society in a PhD program. But to bring that really, the intellectual dimension, the heart dimension, the vision that I have, into fully embodied action. And that is the dream that I have, and that is also why I've come today, because I feel this spirit is here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this inspiring presentation of the work you are doing, and I think it's great to see, and it might be inspiring for some of the students here in the audience to pursue a PhD or a master thesis in that field, how your personal history can shape your academic work and transform both society, academia, and yourself over the process of a PhD, which lasts several years. And after these 2 presentations, I would now like to open the floor for our interactive discussion and ask everybody in the room to write on their paper one or many ways in which you could activate the power of art and culture to realize your visions for peace building, peace, and how to increase your own impact in your communities. And whilst you're doing that, I'm already opening up the floor for you to share your own insights and your own opinions how art, storytelling, culture, theater can help to transform societies, and also ask questions to our panelists. And whilst doing so, please briefly introduce yourself, and we will take several comments at once, and then we will give the floor to Elena and Alexander. Who wants to go first?
my name is Scarlett. I'm from the United States, and I worked in Morocco 2 years. One of the NGOs in Morocco was called Paix Morocco, and it was Paix in Arabic means more or less storytelling Morocco.
It means what?
Storytelling. So it's a storytelling NGO that connects young people with the cultural values and expert storytellers in the city of Fez and Marrakesh. And it's a way to like reconnect youth with cultural values and culture of peace, because like I saw in the video in Colombia and throughout the world, like youth are seen as those who are not connected with cultural values, who seem like the, I guess, dangerous people, when in reality, like they're not. I was wondering, with your guys' work, what you do to train young people for storytelling, or how do you, especially in Colombia, I guess, how did you train or, really train the young people in how to tell their story, or if that was a part of it, or, just curious.
Maybe you take a second hand, because I saw somebody else in the back raised her. Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually not making a question, I was sharing as you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so my name is Thais. I am a master's student of development studies here, and I'm also a scout, like the Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts that you see in the United States movies. So it's very different from that. Actually, it's a global movement, and it's an educational movement, and I think like it has a lot to do with what you were saying for this holistic development, because in the methods of this movement, there is basically present in every country of the world. You have the development of your character, of the affective part, like the social, spiritual, and also intellectual. So you work through like games. The children don't really realize what they're doing, but you always like try to make them develop these aspects in their lives, their involvement in the community, and they are also present in many conflict situations. And this is exactly what I am researching in my master thesis right now, and I'm very inspired by everything that you shared, because exactly this holistic development can help them in many other forms. Like it's a non-formal education that sometimes brings them more skills to face the situation they're in than if they were just in a common school that's sometimes so hard to have, for example, in refugee camps with like books, teachers, and pencils. So yeah, that's the sharing I wanted to do.
Thank you very much. Maybe a third comment, because I saw another.
Thank you. My name is Maureen Rahim. I'm studying humanitarian law in the Geneva Academy, and I come from Bangladesh. So, as you know, Bangladesh has been facing in 1971 a 9-month-long war. And after the war, it was so difficult for the government and also the civil society organization to deal with the sexual violence victims. So the people at large started some activities that can inspire those victims of sexual violence to speak up, and also exercise their rights, and also to speak to the community what they have felt and how to heal this trauma. So through drama, through making the sculptures, they started to heal with this issue. And now at this moment, it has been almost 48 years, but now the sexual violence victims are a lot in a better position, because now the community has given them a good space to speak up. So it's a different thing that I wanted to share. I mean, it's very necessary to let the victims of sexual violence to speak up, and through art, culture, they could speak more. And another thing that is, we are now dealing with the Rohingya people in the makeshift camps. There are so many cultural organizations from Bangladesh. They are actually dealing with the issues. also for the children. They are now learning how to deal with this pupil, and also delivering some sort of trainings, and also giving them the space to speak, so that they, in this temporary makeshift camps, they can at least live with a good situation, and they can heal their sufferings. So that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for these comments. Shall we take a first round of responses and then we come back to the floor afterwards? Maybe Elena.
Yeah, so thanks so much. They're all very insightful comments. I think the, well, just a comment on the scout comment. I was also a scout for a long time, and you say you never cease to be a scout, right? And I think on the side, it was a perfect preparation for an ethnographic PhD, because it really teaches you how to be adaptable also to very different situations and to be flexible, and that was certainly very useful in Colombia. But on to the more direct question on how did I train the young people. Well, I don't, oh, sorry. What did I do? Oh yes. I don't really like to use the word training, because it kind of conveys the idea that I would have taught them something and that they would learn something, and I think it was much more collaborative, and certainly if there is one who has learned more, it was me, thanks to them. The only thing that we did train them for was the very technical issue of using a camera, which, because actually the shootings were done by them, so I wasn't the expert, but I got someone to teach them how to operate it and how to use, switch on and off and do some basic editing, and that was really a helpful training. But other than that, it was really a common exercise to understand, I had never done this before, and anyways, even if I had done it, it would have been different, because every group is so different. And I think the idea was really to, how do we, through collective sort of reflection, come out with a model or with a way of working together that leads us to a product that we want. So we spent quite a lot of time in preparation. We would meet weekly, and we were just brainstorming on different issues the kids were facing, having lots of discussions. Also, really some contrast between them, as you've seen, some of the kids, they never talk in first person, but some of the kids were, involved in drugs and things, and others were obviously morally condemning that type of use. So there were a lot of clashes, but I think the main point was always around trying to understand each other, and then how do we work together, even if we are so different, to produce something that we're proud of. And so it was very slow at the beginning. We chatted a lot, and it seemed like it wasn't going anywhere, and I always emphasized that the important thing was the process. But then at the end, it got to the actual screening, shooting, and that was very exciting for them, because it was something they had never done before. And it was very iterative. So we were shooting, then we were watching the clips together. They were asking questions to each other and seeing whether they were happy with the product. And we changed the things that they didn't like, and it went on like that. So, it's not a panacea, and obviously there is a lot of influence. I recognize my own influence in this work. Obviously, it's not like their voice is unmediated, but I wouldn't say I trained them in any way to tell their story. I think it came up. They had lots of things to tell, so that wasn't, something I had to incentivize very much.
Yeah, just briefly, I very much liked all three comments. I wanted to say something about storytelling, and I agree with your point of training. I also prefer terms like catalyzation or development, but that's really on the side. Well, I've noticed, for example, that in many of the cultures I work, people are naturally much better storytelling than the conventional European is, for example. In particular in the Arab world, I find there is an incredible gift for storytelling, in particular if they can speak in their own language. I just come actually from Egypt, and there's two clues I wanted to share on that level, which is, it was actually a setting in the Tahrir Lounge. Tahrir is Freedom Lounge, and it was an NGO started based on what happened on Tahrir Square, and they wanted to continue that journey. They live quite a dangerous life at the moment, you can imagine. But here I had 15 young transformation agents, and they all tapped into their story. One way, which kind of playfully turned out to be a real success, was we talked about the meanings of their names. Mohammed, Omar, Nur was one, and everyone. And I was amazed in this particular case, not only had a meaning of the name, but there was a story in their own culture, you know, be it the Prophet himself, or be someone close to the Prophet, or some kind of military general who was, you know, or Aladdin, one was called Aladdin, you know, the great general, with a big compassionate heart. So they had somewhere a story to tell which was linked to their name and to their vision, which of what they wanted to contribute to society. The other thing, the big story. How do you get people to tell? I mean, I was in Egypt, and Egypt, of course, at the moment you may say it's a basket case on many levels. But then this place brought forth one of the world's largest living civilizations on this planet, 5,000 years. Gosh, they have a story to tell, and we tapped deeply into these stories, and the people grew a lot in connecting to, wow, we do have something to bring, and I think this is for me incredibly vital. Once there's a sense of I or we have something to contribute and to bring, then also the story moves much faster, and of course also the ReSTORY-ing, because that's part of our conversation today. I wanted to say, if I may, because you helped me Noreen, sorry, to remember that I jumped over one important case that I wanted to share, which is the case of Loshni in South Africa. Her father was a freedom fighter side by side with Tutu and Mandela. She is an Indian South African, and she saw the marginalization of women, in particular also within the Indian community, and she became a freedom fighter for women. And she worked with women who were exposed to sexual violence through her own PhD. And the subtitle of her PhD, which is here, is African Women Rising. And at the very end, she came up with this work, which one of the women has produced, a woman's artist, about illustrating what her own PhD symbolizes, women liberating themselves actually to, you know, participate more fully in society. But a key point I wanted to link to this, for me, the cultural expression, drama or imagery, is very important, or the story, to restore something. But I feel the key thing, which is often forgotten, that culture for me is a bridge, because after the restoration, how do we then deliver on the economic front, for example, on the community front, on the scientific front, meaning that these cultures also produce their own knowledge, creating a new foundation for their own future, which for me is part of the restoring potential of culture. And thank you for that trigger, Marie.
Thank you very much. And I saw there were two more hands over there with comments or questions.
Thank you. I'm Tanya Pafnos from the Inclusive Peace and Transition Initiative here at the Grant Institute. And I wanted to share an example from using proverbs, storytelling, and films in a different setting, which is we work a lot with what Alexander also said, how to make research useful for people in the field, but we have been asked a lot to work on a high level also, not only on a community level, and I wanted to give you an example on how you can even do that on that level, because often we talk about this is on the community level, this is not on these high level processes that you can't use it. And I was just coming back from Tunisia working with a group of high level women from Libya who were basically involved in diplomatic initiatives for their country and felt also greatly excluded as women, but were pushing for that. So one thing what we realized, as you said, Alexander, the Middle East, we're starting with, instead of saying like I'm so-and-so, I'm coming from so-and-so, starting with a proverb, and that proverb expresses like who these people are, and also to tell like what is basically your job, what are you doing with a proverb, and that was already a very rich starting point. What happens usually in that context is that people, when you bring them together from different political camps, that they're basically yelling at each other. And we were very prepared for the yelling exercise and what we do if it happens and stuff. What we did is giving a lot of examples, but cluster them in a, let's say, research way, like what have been strategies of people coming together, overcoming their differences, and then influencing peace processes really like on this high level. So we gave them both the kind of, I would say, scientific clustering of it, but also the stories behind and the experiences. And after that, we showed them the movie, Pay the Devil Back to Hell, which is the movie of the Liberian woman that sort of tried to end the war. And they got so inspired by that movie that they started to tell their own stories and how they think, what they had already done to reduce violence. And then they had also came up, like they worked the whole day on just doing action plans on what they can do together because they were so greatly inspired. So I think it's really useful, like, and we learned a lot on how to use sort of all this, even in these settings.
Thank you very much for this thought-provoking comment. And we have one more question or comment. Marika? Sorry, who goes first?
My name is Sarah, and I'm here on behalf of Iranian NGO, and I don't have a question actually. I want to share the experience of this NGO. They're working for 20 years now in Iran, especially in the child and women issues or related topic. They work in the margin area of the big cities or mega cities. So the experience was that they want to be with the child and to be seeing them somehow and to connect at this different social society level together. So one of the way that they did that is that to give another platform to the kids to express themselves, and which is art and also sport. So they try to, especially with theater, most of these kids have a really lots of family problems. Their parents are addicted. And for example, they have like child marriage in this society, and so when they play theater based on the story that they somehow experienced, like the domestic violence or so, they after that we see that they are really released and they find another way to express themselves to be seen somehow with the society. So that's what I want to share.
Thank you. And then there was one more.
I have two questions. The first one is with regard to this holistic idea of peace, and I wondered whether you have a lexicon for this idea of transformative peace, or you might be thinking about something like that because your vocabulary is very specific in how we think and orient ourselves toward peace in this idea, the large idea. And my second question is care. It's a word. It's an acronym, care for you. And I wondered whether in the care idea you have a particular logic that it has to be C-A-R-E, or could I have E before R? Could I have A before E? And how that might impact on the holistic idea. Thank you very much.
So what is your name again?
I beg your pardon. I'm Nikita. I'm a PhD scholar here studying peace and international.
Yeah. Thanks, Nikita. Elena, would you want to say something?
No.
Or should I? The lexicon was one question, whether I have a lexicon. And I mean, I don't. But what we do have, and perhaps that expresses also something which I'm very passionate about. I mean, I showed you today a book. We were lucky that Routledge gave us an entire book series called the Transformational Innovation Series. And I'm not telling that to boost, but what I'm saying is that many of our PhDs, when they have applied the holistic approach in their particular context, and if the work is very good, can join the series. So the series has now grown to, I think, 26 or 28 volumes from contributions from Africa, from Nigeria, from the entire Middle East, from India. So we are kind of also trying to build up a knowledge base, which is an inner-outer. So it's not like we've written all the tombs and then everyone has to apply it, but rather we began to seed the process and now it becomes a living knowledge creation field. So that's one thing. The other thing, the particular order of C-A-R-E. Well, there's a purpose behind it. I just want to say very briefly, the community for me, in most cases, is the starting point. Actually, for me, it's nature and community. It's what we call the southern dimension. We have this integral fourfold and the southern, because this is the foundation of life on which we stand. Community fabric, social cohesion, nature. And then that is the C. The A is the awakening of the spirit. Once we identified issues in our particular context, in our nature, in our communities, often we move to practice, and that leads to imitation, I believe. Rather, I say, go then into the A, awakening cultural space. There you find the answers within yourself or in dialogue with someone else. And so you evolve your own creative capacity as an individual or as a culture. And then when the new imagery, the new perspectives are there, then to translate them first into our research, to make it explicit. So the idea is not get lost, but it also becomes part of the global knowledge creation fabric, and you make it explicit. And then E, embodiment, you make it happen. And of course, it shouldn't be necessarily linear, but C and R begin, because to my mind, these are the two most forgotten areas which we need most of restoration, and then the research and the more embodied economic agenda follow. So that's the logic, but it doesn't have to be like this, but it's how we often travel. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with all of this in mind, I think all of your comments and all the questions and contributions underline one thing, namely that wherever in the world your examples come from, they show which transformative power storytelling, art, culture can have on individuals and communities as a whole. And therefore, in conclusion, with all of what we've heard in mind, I would like to ask our two panelists to, in 1 minute, share their final thoughts on today's session.
Yeah, I think it's been really enriching, and I really like this last session in which it wasn't really a Q&A, but really sharing different experiences. And perhaps one thought I often have on using, arts and visual methods. We often hear this verb said speak up, right? And I used it myself. I said, these kids have said important things and we should listen to them. But I think we always have to remember that speaking up is not enough to change situations. It's often not enough to heal, but it's not enough to change structures of exclusion that might push certain people to experience certain forms of violence. And so I think when we use this type of methods, we have to be very careful in not thinking that that's the end point, that that's enough at all. It's not enough to do a documentary to change the situation of these kids. It's not enough to show it around. It doesn't change. It changes little in their daily lives, really. I think it was an important experience for them, but they're still faced with the same problems, right? So I think the last two letters, perhaps, of the care model are very important because they lead to, what is actionable from this and what can we do as researchers, as activists, but also as the people themselves. It won't stop your problem if you just speak up. What can you act? What can you do on it? So I think I would just leave this final thought.
Well, despite the gratitude for that this event was possible, I feel, for me, it was very important because it's one of the steps we are taking to take culture, as I feel, out of this kind of forgotten corner, and rather to evolve it and to see it as an incredibly potent space for restoring the creative life potential of people and societies, and that also came so beautifully through the sharings that we have heard, and just a wish that we could have many more of these kind of events, and perhaps even translate that into the very way how we do education in a much more interconnected, sharing way. We can do even better than today, I imagine, because we are not sitting in a very conducive format. It's a bit, we hear you there, but it was an incredibly valuable event from my side, and I thank you, Moritz, and everyone who helped organizing it, and a big applause to you and your team. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as we're coming to the end, we can continue our discussions in a more conducive format, inside the room, outside the room, or maybe even later in the cafeteria. And before you're leaving the room, I would like to ask you to take your sticky notes with the messages you have written and put them over here on the whiteboard so we can document them and take them with us so they don't get lost. Thank you very much.